You're watching Meridian Tonight, where you join us for a special programme to mark the 65th anniversary of the D-Day invasion.
And I'm here at Pegasus Bridge, where the fighting began, where soldiers from the south were involved in a daring nighttime raid, without which D-Day couldn't have happened.
It was in this room where history was made and the course of the war changed. It also presented General Eisenhower with the hardest decision of the 20th century.
Yes, the weather nearly scuppered the whole operation. It was the men of the Met who played a crucial role in deciding when D-Day happened.
And I'm here in the studio to look at the election results and the rest of the day's news.
Good evening to you. Wherever you are watching this evening, this programme, the chances are that your city, town, village or community played a role in the biggest military operation of all time, D-Day, devised, planned and launched here in the south. Now, in a moment, we shall be crossing live to our correspondent, Derek Johnson, who's in Normandy with some of the many veterans gathered to mark the 65th anniversary of this extraordinary military operation designed to bring the Second World War to an end. First, though, let me show you where I am this evening, because tonight this is the map room of Suffolk House near Portsmouth. It was the Royal Navy's main headquarters for D-Day, but also the place where General Dwight D. Eisenhower made that crucial decision to send ships to launch the invasion force across the English Channel. In truth, of course, the entire region was involved. Millions of people working everywhere, from the airfields of Oxfordshire to the factories of Kent. Now, D-Day was launched in the early hours of June the 6th, 1944, from more than a dozen ports and embarkation ports along the south. The main ones stretching from Seaford in Sussex through to Portsmouth and across to Poole and Weymouth in Dorset, and then beyond into the West Country. 156,000 American, British and Canadian troops landed over a 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coast at 5 beaches given special code names. There were 5,300 ships and 12,000 aeroplanes in action. Figures for the amount of casualties are hard to come by, but at least 2,500 Allied troops died on the first day, many more in the fighting that followed. War cemeteries in Normandy house the remains of more than 110,000 dead from both sides. Historians, though, look back and say that the huge sacrifice was worth it. A year later, Hitler was dead and the war was over. This grand manor house was requisitioned in wartime by the Royal Navy and was the HQ for D-Day's naval commander, Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay. And it was an ideal base too for Eisenhower and his staff in the final weeks before the invasion. As Supreme Commander of what was codenamed Operation Overlord, this future President of the United States spent many hours here agonizing over when to launch his armada.
At the time, it was absolutely necessary to be done because there was people, you know, under the yoke of the Nazis who were having a pretty horrible time. And of course, it was difficult because it had to be a seaborne invasion. In fact, it was the biggest seaborne invasion ever.
Eisenhower's biggest headache was the weather, which had delayed the invasion once already. In this room, he had his final meeting with the men from the Met Office before settling on a final date. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of troops were massed on the south coast, ready and waiting.
Perhaps the most incredible thing is the amount of secrecy that surrounded the whole operation. And it's a secrecy I don't think we can imagine today still being kept.
As the landing craft set off, everyone knew that after 5 long years of war, the tide was finally turning. Well, here at Southwark, the D-Day headquarters, I'm joined now by Lieutenant Colonel Peter House. Peter, D-Day, just how big a gamble was it for the Allies?
It was a tremendous gamble. 18 months in the planning, the largest military enterprise ever undertaken, and there was no plan B. It had to work.
When Eisenhower launched the invasion, what did he actually say?
Well, he came in here having consulted with his deputies, and the official version is he walked into the middle of this room and said, "OK, let's go." The unofficial version, which he never denied, is he walked in and said, "OK, let her rip."
Which is a better version, isn't it?
More Hollywood, I suppose, yes.
I said earlier, people right across the South were involved in this. Give me examples.
The whole of the South was involved. There was a lockdown along most of the South Coast from the April onwards. There was a lot of restriction on movement for the locals as well as for the military. And in particular, this house was in complete lockdown. Nobody was allowed in or out for the 2 months preceding D-Day itself.
So everybody really was involved?
They
Everybody
were.
Played a part, whether they knew it or not?
Yes, they did.
Yeah. And the big question, D-Day. What does the D in D-Day actually stand for? What does it mean?
It's very simple. D stands for day. As simple as that.
To keep the whole thing so that everybody understood where they were and what it meant. Even if they'd changed the day, it would have still...
If they changed the date, then they would not have had to change all their plans, and that's why we still use D-Days and H hours.
Fascinating. Peter, we'll talk again later in the programme. And let's now cross, though, live to Derek Johnson, who's waiting for us in France, in Normandy. Derek.
Fred, if you're in the place where the big decision was made, then this is where D-Day began. Not by the beaches, but a couple of miles inland at what's now called Pegasus Bridge over a canal. Many veterans and people have been gathered here today, attending various events. There'll be more tonight and tomorrow. Why is that exactly? Well, just after midnight on June the 6th, 1944, while all those landing craft were still stacked up along the south coast of England, 181 fighting men were dropped here by glider, the vast majority from the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry. It was the dead of night, a full moon punching light into the blackness, guiding the troops to their targets. They took a bridge here and another nearby, took them and then held them, stopped the Germans from getting through. You may well ask, what is so significant about an operation involving a few hundred when tens of thousands landed on those beaches? Well, I tell you now, without Pegasus or the Ox and Bucks, led by Major John Howard, D-Day would never have happened. The airborne troops of the Ox and Bucks trained long and hard for their part in D-Day before arriving at Tarrant Rushton Airfield in Dorset, where they were put into 6 wooden gliders, Horsa gliders, bound for Normandy, aiming to take 2 bridges by stealth.
John Howard knew we was going to land 2 years before the operation, but he never told a soul where we were going. He even never told his second in command or his wife. He kept that secret until we went to Tarrant Rushton.
And each glider could carry 30 men, 2 pilots and 28 passengers. They didn't wear parachutes, and the only way they could get out of the glider was when it crashed onto the ground. So it was a very dangerous way to go to war.
They were so young. The average age for the airborne soldiers was 20, 4 years less than those landing on the beaches. The pilots of the glider, you see one behind us here, they were 24, 25 years of age.
Rocky, you were one of those soldiers from the Ox and Bucks, and you landed near here in a glider.
Yes, by the River Orne. We were a bit apprehensive, naturally, but we had a job to do, we'd rehearsed it, and we knew exactly what our position was to be.
Each pilot of the gliders had done 42 practice landings on Salisbury Plain in the weeks before the operation. They didn't know where they were going to be landing in France, but they knew they were going to get down close to something. And at the end, of course, the last few hours, they were told where their bridges were.
The Ox and Bucks were relieved later by the Parachute Regiment. The fighting was hard all day, but the bridges taken. The beaches protected from German attacks, and a vital supply line captured for the Allies.
A lump comes in my throat every time I think about it, really, because it is one of the greatest moments of my life.
That was the most important operation in the war, believe me. If we'd have lost those bridges, you wouldn't be sitting here talking to me now. We saved England, and I can honestly say that. I'm very proud of it.
Titch Rayner and the story of Pegasus Bridge. What's been really impressive is the amount of Normandy veterans who've been not just here but all over Normandy, because to be a D-Day vet you have to be in your 80s or your 90s. Yes, they've been helped by the British government by lottery funding, which has meant they've been able to come with their families and sometimes with carers. Well, our correspondent Mike Pearce has been out and about today looking at all the events and talking to what is sadly a dwindling band of brothers.
A dramatic start to the day with 400 members of the Parachute Regiment landing on the site of the Normandy battlefields. For many veterans involved in D-Day, poignant memories.
18 years old, you feel infallible, invulnerable actually. Nothing's ever going to happen to you. I must admit, on landing, it's the first time I'd ever been sick after a jump. It was the only time, but I hit the ground, it was lonely, there was nobody else about.
From across the region they're here to commemorate the battles which involved hundreds of thousands of Allied troops to stop Hitler advancing from occupied Europe to Britain. From the air, 11,000 planes and 13,000 vessels from the sea. Across Normandy, the day was full of ceremonies and events to commemorate D-Day 65 years ago tomorrow. It's not only the veterans who are back, but also a small army of reenactors and military historians to pay their respects some 65 years on. Of course, it was on these beaches all those years ago. Some 100,000 people were landed in a single day. Tragically, many were to lose their lives. Why have you come over?
Mainly to pay our respects, I think. Just to come and see the war graves, museums and things like that. So.
Do you think it's important because, I mean, we hear it's the 65th and this is the last big one. It's important that we just keep up that memory of what happened 65 years ago?
I think everybody should know, and I think the kids should be taught it at school as well. And yeah, I think it's something that should be done every year.
But for some, a moment to reflect by themselves away from the official events. How do you feel to have been part of D-Day?
I can't help myself. I'm a very proud old man, but said to me, oh, well, your boys were heroes. Well, we weren't. The heroes were the poor buggers what didn't come back. Yeah, and that's as simple as that.
Mike Pearce in Normandy for Meridian Tonight.
Well, it is emotional stuff, isn't it? The main events will take place tomorrow. That's when Prime Minister Gordon Brown and Prince Charles will be attending all these many events across Normandy. An event we're looking forward to tonight here at Pegasus Bridge is the arrival of more than 150 runners who set off from Dorset a couple of days ago. They're trying to time their arrival to just after midnight, to the minute when those airborne troops arrived here 65 years ago. For now, that's it from us at Normandy. Back to you, Fred, in Suffolk House.
Thanks very much indeed, Derek. It is an extraordinary story. It makes you feel quite emotional seeing those sort of pictures, and we shall be returning to France a little later in the programme. First, though, here's Sangeeta live in the studio for us now with the rest of the day's news and, of course, all the very latest on those local elections.
Thanks, Fred. Hello. The votes have been counted and the results are now coming in. Nationally, it has been a bad day for Labour, but what has been happening where you are? We start our roundup in Hampshire. A glimmer of hope among Labour's ongoing gloom. Supporters celebrate a rare victory in the local council elections. Labour wins just one council seat in the whole of Hampshire, with the Tories retaining overall control.